and let us all do we can to build a better future. Now, everyone, let's get started with our first segment. I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in this. And shout out to our good friend, Case Study QB. Be sure to follow him on Twitter. He does a lot of fantastic work for a lot of independent media outlets. Apparently, there's a big union fight with Amazon. Now, this is going to focus on what's happening in some of the southern states, but there's also a few other states in Ohio, Iowa, and a few others where they're talking about unionizing. And I think it's long overdue that the workers of Amazon actually step up and fight back. But let's play this first video phase. Let's get that ready, and you two will start off with the commentary after the video's done playing.
At one Amazon warehouse in Alabama will make its way all the way to Capitol Hill when one of the pro-union workers testifies before the Senate Budget Committee. The company's CEO, Jeff Bezos, declined an invitation to attend. The hearing, organized by Senator Bernie Sanders, will focus on income inequality, something that this pandemic has put a spotlight on, as Jeff Bezos' personal wealth, which is separate from Amazon, has shot up by more than $90 billion, while some workers there struggled to get by and stay safe in the process. Our next guest writes about the wealth gap across this country through the eyes of Amazon in a brand new book, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in a One-Click America. Alec McGillis, the author and reporter for ProPublica, joins us now. Alec, at the beginning of this book, you paint an image of this massive Amazon headquarters in Seattle. It's extraordinary. It's beautiful. The city's amazing. But then you take us to a story of a warehouse worker in Dayton, Ohio, who's living with his family in a homeless shelter. Talk to us about the gap you saw when you reported on this.
The gaps around the country are just extraordinary, and they've gotten bigger. We've always had richer and poorer places in America, of course, but those gaps have gotten so much wider. The gap between what I call sort of winner-take-all cities and left behind towns and cities. The gentleman in Dayton, Ohio, was actually a cardboard box maker. He made cardboard boxes for Amazon, and when I first met him, he and his family were living in a shelter in Dayton because he was making so little money. Their life was in such upheaval, so completely unstable. That's where they had found themselves, and just to me, it was just such a strong example of the kind of ecosystem of this new universe we live in, where so many of us are now buying our goods through this kind of one-click shopping, and it takes you all the way from the billionaires at the top, all the way down to the man making the cardboard boxes that we get on our doorstep, and then I also took readers into the warehouses themselves, including in Baltimore, where there's this incredibly kind of telling example of a place that used to hold the largest steel mill in the world, where workers were making $35 an hour, good benefits, real sense of community and purpose.
Okay, before we play that second video, Craig Fiorella, let's add some commentary, because that corporate media will not really talk about the real big picture. Fee, we'll start off with you first.
Well, I mean, this is just a testament to the fact that I don't think we're going to vote our way out of this. Like, we're at a point where the wealth disparity is so vast, and this pandemic has only exacerbated that. The conditions that we have been living through would have been dealt with in a different fashion had we social safety nets, had we healthcare, had we a livable wage, had we unions, had we all the things that we don't have. Now, because we didn't have those things, and on top of that, our government didn't give us those things, now you're seeing people like Jeff Bezos become trillionaires while people are becoming more poor. Now we have homeless people who work full time. What's happening throughout this country has already been happening in big cities like Los Angeles for a long time. Mm-hmm. What worries me is that we're seeing the homelessness population spread throughout America in smaller areas and smaller towns, which is scary because that means that this is a national problem now that they can no longer control. So I don't think we can vote our way out of this. I think this is the start of where we're going to see more organizing from the working class, especially having been through these actions that we did this past week. I think the moment to seize is right now, because people don't have like any other recourse. To try to get politicians to lead on this hasn't been working. Bernie Sanders has done some good when it comes to the $15 minimum wage, but simultaneously, $15 is no longer enough in many parts of the country anyway. Yeah. And by the time we get it approved, which was supposed to be a shoo-in, right? It didn't happen. And by the time we get it it'll be too late. So I think we're going to start seeing people take to the streets like we've seen Chris Smalls and several others do as well.
All right. Craig, would you like to add in some comments?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was looking at the list of everything we were going over today, and so many things are just all connected. When we look at these things right over here, I immediately think about NAFTA, and I think about how our productions and our manufacturing jobs went overseas, and what do we have left? Pretty much a upscale but low-waged post office of sorts, where people just box things up and ship them out, it really is just a shame when you look at these situations, because people are told, well, hey, if you don't want to work here, go work somewhere else, but all the jobs are gone, and these are the only jobs we have right here. And the only reason why Bezos is a billionaire is because we have our stuff where we exploit labor overseas, in Asian America, Indochina, and the global South, whatnot. And this is the situations we're constantly left with right now. I mean, the only way we're going to stop this whole thing, it's a 2-word solution: general strike. If we don't do that, nothing's going to change. We need to literally shut it down. We have starvation waves, like Fiorella said. I think it was 40% of homeless people in LA that live in Skid Row are working full time. 40% of it. Yeah. That is a systemic problem. So when you see issues like this, whether it be in Georgia, Atlanta, LA, whatnot, it's just a micro of a macro, what's going on in the states. And we have some serious problems, especially when it comes to labor. We have a lack of unions. Yeah. And not for nothing, we don't make anything anymore. So all we have is these shit jobs. Nobody gets paid while Bezos is making money hand over fist.
I also want to be very clear with one thing here, too, especially here in the city of Chicago. We do have a homelessness crisis here in our city. And I love driving to this studio, but underneath the bridges and viaducts and everywhere else, inside the abandoned buildings, I'm seeing more tent cities. And I'm very glad in their first opening statement, you said, hey, wouldn't a person's idea maybe going to find a different place, find a different job, or go somewhere else, And I want you to hold on to that thought, because our friends in corporate media will be saying that. In fact, FaZe, let's play that second video. Your words will be repeated very soon.
Tough work, but very well paid. And now in that exact same place, you've got warehouses, 2 Amazon warehouses, where workers are making less than a half of what their counterparts used to make at the mill. So just this incredible sorting out in America between the places that are kind of absorbing a lot of the wealth of this new economy, like Seattle, like Washington D.C., and then places like Dayton and Baltimore that are really kind of struggling.
Those cities that are struggling is one of the issues that steel mill wasn't open before that Amazon warehouse came to the city. So these aren't good enough jobs, but they're jobs. Were there no jobs before? Is there a gap we're not accounting for?
It's a very good point, and that's exactly what Amazon would say. Amazon, which I spoke to at length for the book, will say, "Look, these jobs at the warehouse are better than nothing, right?" That steel mill had been wiped clean off the face of this peninsula called Sparrows Point outside Baltimore. There was nothing there until it was reborn now as a logistics hub, but there's still a real such a strong. A strong example of really how work is transformed in this country, that the working class jobs, the kind of entry level working class jobs that large numbers of people used to rely on was once one kind of work, and now it's another kind of work. And one of the key differences between those kinds of work is the fact that the manufacturing jobs were so heavily unionized, and that's the reason.
Then that's what I know. We don't have much time, but that's what I'd love for you to help us understand, that those factory jobs were unionized, because right now we live in a free market, right? If Amazon workers don't like what they're getting paid, theoretically, they could go work somewhere else. However, Amazon has wiped out all of those other places to work because they're so big and successful. So potential workers have no power because there are no other jobs. Is the only answer to unionize. Otherwise, Amazon will forever control what the labor force can get paid given their size.
There are 2 main answers. One is the other big fight we're about to have in Washington, which is around monopoly and antitrust and possible.
Okay, so here's the thing. I want to stop the video right there and just address something. Ever since the previous Republican and Democratic presidential administrations, we've been walking on the pathway of neoliberalism and neoliberal policies. And because of this, with the silent, obedient consent of the American people, as well as our corporate media keep on hitting the drums of this propaganda of neoliberalism and just, hey, accept your crumbs, it's going to have to take a general strike. But in order to do a general strike, there must be real organization, and people got to organize. It's one thing to lead a charge, but if the charge isn't effective, nothing will happen. I don't know if this happened in your area in Los Angeles or anywhere else that you cover, because you guys have done a lot of groundwork covering protests and activism all across the state of California. And again, fantastic work here in the city of Chicago, especially the early days of Heartlands Media. We covered a lot of protests and activism, but this was during the Trump administration. Everyone would protest, start at one spot, there would be 1,000 people, and then they'd march to Trump Tower, be corralled in a little pen. Trump Tower's across the river, everyone protests, nothing happens. It's one thing to lead a charge, but there has to be organization. Now, the thing is with Amazon, these union workers, they need to push back, and I'm really concerned about how much pull Jeff Bezos has with the Democratic and Republican lawmakers there, or is it at people who will be associated with Amazon? But Daniel, you mentioned something, and maybe I think I should give you the final note for this, because you mentioned something very interesting that Amazon workers could do if they did do a strike, if there was a way to really kind of hurt Amazon.
Well, this is what we were talking about on the show yesterday with Laney that we did a clip on. It's very important that we separate the idea of doing what I would call a mob action versus an organized action. They're very different fundamentally in how they operate. With Amazon, it's a very, very powerful lean organization. The lean is very important. Another thing to remember is that Amazon, of course, there's always the standard, they produce jobs. They do jobs for people. Like she was saying, it's a free market. They do jobs. Amazon produces a few million jobs at the cost of 20, 30 million retail jobs that used to exist that Amazon has simply replaced. The United States as a whole has stopped manufacturing its own things. So the fact that that factory was abandoned in the first place, why would you even connect it to Amazon? This is a Bill Clinton-led NAFTA issue that made us not manufacture our own stuff. If we manufactured our own stuff, maybe everything would be 5 or 10% more expensive on average, but that money goes back into America. It doesn't go overseas. You don't have to have all the shipping expenses. You don't have to have the huge distribution network that Amazon has, that Amazon's built. It's crazy to think that Amazon, Walmart, these giant companies, because of the way that they are trying to maximize their profit, they're really fantastic at doing this distribution stuff, which means they squeeze everyone else out. So you have workers that are in these facilities that are doing jobs that are repetitive. They cause stresses. I mean, obviously the adult diapers is a whole thing in and of itself. It's to the point that even South Park does episodes on it because it's so ridiculous. But it's the way things are moving. And it's crazy that we even had to, that Bernie even had to convince them to raise their wages to 15 in the first place. But going back to what can be done, I want to remind everyone, Amazon warehouses and the Amazon business model, specifically with Amazon, because they have their web services and all the other stuff, but specifically their warehouses run at a immensely small profit margin. We're talking like the same that actually you'd encounter when you talk about rail lines with like 1%. So whatever the cost is 1%. It's very, 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 very small profit. So the point I was making is if hypothetically, a lot of these locations are not built inside city centers because the land's very expensive. They build outside the city. Usually they are connected by a single off-ramp or not that many roads going in and out. And so I was just saying that, hypothetically, if a car broke down on that off-ramp for an hour, traffic couldn't go through, well, they might not be profitable that day. And you are able to systemically, if that hypothetically systemically maintains itself for a long enough period, they're now losing money every day. That's the thing people got to realize a lot with these new companies. It's like racing greyhounds, but you take out all the organs they don't need to run. Makes the dog a dog doesn't need an immune system right now, but it might in the long run. So a lot of these companies are run in that sort of a fashion. So remember, if you're trying to unionize or anything, they have very obvious pressure points that can be hypothetically applied, and you just have to know where to hit these guys.
So yeah, hypothetically. So Craig, wink, hypothetically.
Yeah, hypothetically. Well, I just want to say too, I think it's also part of our society. Daniel, I don't even know if we'd have to pay 5% more for our stuff if the CEO just took a little bit less. I mean, these guys are making trillions, right? I mean, Bezos is set to be one of the first trillionaires ever, whatnot. So I really don't even think it's a point that, they tell people, hey, if we don't have our stuff made in China, if we don't have stuff made overseas, you're going to have to pay more for your stuff. No, just the CEOs are going to have to take a little bit less. But the also problem within itself, I think, is is a systemic problem, right? It's that pull yourselves up by your bootstraps kind of mentality. You don't want to work here, get out of here. We have 5 or 6 guys waiting to take your place right away. 80% of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck. They're 1 foot out the door. So people are desperate right now. So they know that people are desperate. So if somebody's speaking up, causing problems, hey, shit, they have intel information from guys they're hiring there to go in there and spy and find out who the troublemakers are. They remove them, and the next guy comes right in.
One thing I just wanted to point out real quick is because of what Daniel said, mutual aid is a good way of kind of allowing people to have the facility of striking or occupying or stopping the work. Because in America, unlike the vast majority of other nations, our healthcare and our benefits are directly tied to your work. So that's why so many people do not protest. What we've been finding is if there is a mutual aid, people do go out there and fund each other. They do go out there and occupy and protest. I think the point has come to where we have to even discuss if Amazon should even exist as it is, because we're coming to a point in technology where workers will be replaced by robots. I don't think there's going to be anything we can do to stop that. So we have to build work in new areas. And in order to do that, places like Amazon, which is essentially basically like the US Postal Service, but that can provide more goods at a faster rate, they should be nationalized. Amazon has become so necessary, especially for people during the pandemic, that's why people who don't even want to use Amazon are forced to use it. It allows people to get cheaper goods at a faster rate. So obviously they're going to use that when they don't have money. So it's become a necessity. So in order for that to happen, the Amazon would have to be operated by and for the people. When he was talking about stopping or traffic getting in the way of Amazon's normal schedule, well, that's kind of like how workers in India organize. They involved the truck drivers. They involved all these people. And so in order to do that, there has to be a very organized system where you start stopping the workforce for a specific reason until you have a very specific set of demands met. And that is, I think, where America needs to desperately head to.
I think that's a good note to end it on. So I want everyone who's been paying attention to this, especially Amazon workers, remember, Daniel said in a hypothetical scenario, if you guys want to do this, but in order to go forward, Craig is correct. We need to do a general strike. Fiorello is right. We have to do a general strike, but it has to be organized. If we just do a mob protest, and we covered this on yesterday's show, and you can check out that clip, check it out after our live stream, we got to really plan things out accordingly so that we're ready. We tried electoral politics. The only way we're going to put pressure on these politicians is if the people lead. And when the people lead, that's when the leaders follow. But with that being said, drink up, folks. We're going to be moving on to our next segment. Before we do, I want to acknowledge some YouTube super chat from Roger Meadows. And I think it's apropos because it's going to Daniel's story. Wait a minute. Is Biden so boring that MSNBC, is forced to cover the plight of the working man, working woman? Wow. And also, we got another one, $10 from our good friend Roger Meadows again. Start ballot initiatives in LA and California to mandate companies make offer to workers to purchase company and restructure into a workers co-op once they get too big before merging, going public, and outsourcing. I agree with that. That sounds very good. And I'm not trying to sound like Rave Dubin saying, I agree with that. All right, Daniel.
And we got 2 more super chats I'm going to read.
All right,
we have another super chat from Roger Meadows saying, because of course the pizza wars must continue. I don't care if it's New York or Chicago, long as you don't eat your pizza Alaskan style with utensils. I think we can all agree on that.
That's what you Chicago people do with
I'm
your
sorry,
pizza
I
over
was
here.
forced
That's
to
a
eat it with
projection
utensils.
that.
Wait a minute.
You're gonna eat that deep
wait a
dish
minute.
pizza,
Wait a
stick that
minute.
over-
No. What's wrong with you 2?
I've only seen that in New York.
Get
What?
out of here.
New
We
York?
get
You walk and eat your pizza
pizza
in
at
New
the
York.
same. You got to have
What?
quick feet as quick hands because the
What?
grease comes out. You got to move.
Yeah.
You got to move your sneakers.
Again, I'm saying
No.
I've seen that all the times I've seen people eat pizza with a fork and knife. It's people in New York.
I